pošto mi je lakše. A i zato što smo u Srbiji, danas imamo veliku čast da budemo sa profesorom Metjom Krenigom, koji je profesor na Џорџа univerzitetu, ali potpredsednik Atlantskog saveta, jednog moćnog think tanka američkog i istovremeno direktor Skroukroft Centra za strategiju i bezbednost. Znači, zaista eminentna ličnost, koja je, slično kao i mi na našem mikronivou, vrlo prisutna u američkim medijima, znači na raznim medijima, od pisanih New York Timesa, Washington Posta, pa do CNN-a i drugih američkih medija. Izvolite, dobar dan. Okay, now in English, I'm very glad that we have the opportunity to host at the Institute of European Studies Professor Metјu Krениг, American political scientist. Metјu Krениг is Professor of Government and Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He's also Vice President of the Atlantic Council and serves the Director of Skroukroft Center for Strategy and Security. He earned his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley. His dissertation was entitled "The Enemy," very interesting, "The Enemy of My Enemy is My Customer: Why States Provide Sensitive Nuclear Assistance." He completed a pre-doctoral fellowship at Stanford University and postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard University. He worked as strategist in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He defined strategies against terrorist networks in 2005. He worked also in Pentagon on Council of Foreign Relations. He was writing in New York Times and Foreign Affairs about US vulnerability to degrading Iran's nuclear facilities. As I said, as our researchers in our micronational level, Professor Krениг often participates in television shows at CNN, CBS, CNBC, analyzing foreign affairs issues. He has a certain political experience regarding that he was foreign policy advisor on Mitt Romney presidential campaign in 2012 and national security advisor of Scott Walker and Marco Rubio during the Republican primaries in 2016. Professor Krениг is author and co-author of 7 books, especially we are interested today about democracy versus autocracy from the ancient world to the US and China, published in 2020. Of course, it will be probably our topic today, and also wrote interesting articles like "China is both weak and dangerous." Okay. Thank you. I will also want to say that I will address my thanks to the American Embassy and special for our researchers Rajko Petrović, who practically get opportunity to us to have Mr. Krениг as our guest today. I will let Rajko to send some words about this lecture, if you want, Rajko.
I mean, you have already said enough about the guest and about. I will only say what will be the topic of this presentation. It will be countering the security threat posed by China, perspectives from Europe and the United States. So I really believe that we are going to have a very interesting presentation and then a very fruitful discussion and exchange of arguments probably. So the presentation will take like 30 minutes, then we will have a half hour to discuss what it is. So,
yes.
Mr. Krениг, please, the floor is yours.
Let's see if we can get out of this two-sided trap, maybe. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you all for joining. It's a pleasure to be here at the Institute of European Studies. And it's my first time in Serbia. I arrived yesterday and had dinner last night in the Bohemian Quarter, and then this morning went for a walk out to the fortress. So I'm starting to see the most important parts of Belgrade. And I'll speak in English. I don't speak Serbian, unfortunately. I'm at the Atlantic Council think tank in Washington. The Atlantic Council is a large, nonpartisan foreign and defense policy think tank in Washington. We were founded in 1961 by two former U.S. Secretaries of State to support transatlantic relations, hence the name Atlantic Council. But since then, we've grown a lot. We cover every issue in the world, including China, and that's what I want to talk to you about today, because there's a lot of political disagreement in Washington, as you've seen, but I think there is agreement that China is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, challenges facing the United States, and maybe the greatest security challenge that ever faced the United States, just given China's capacity. It's much larger than Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union ever were, much more capable than Putin's Russia. But we're in the early phases of this competition. I think the United States is defining its strategy alongside allies and partners, and I think we are well positioned. So that's what I want to talk to you about over the next 30 minutes or so. Talk a little bit about the history of U.S. strategy toward China first. Second, how do we see the threats posed by China today? Third, what is the emerging strategy for dealing with China, including the role of European partners? And then finally, maybe where is this headed? And maybe we can avoid the Thucydides trap. So start, the kind of history of U.S. strategy toward China. Start after World War II, the United States and its allies set up this system that some have referred to as a rules-based international system. Based on strong alliances in Europe, like NATO, and bilateral alliances in Asia, establishment of all these new international institutions, United Nations, World Bank, NATO, International Monetary Fund, Human Rights Convention, etc. Focused on free markets, promoting opening up of new markets and globalization, promoting imperfectly, but where we had the chance, human rights and democracy around the world. No perfect name for this system, but I think rules-based is appropriate because the proliferation of all these institutions and rules is something that's really different with the post-1945 system compared to everything that came before. And the system hasn't been perfect, but and the United States has certainly made mistakes, but I would argue if you just look at the data, this international order has been more successful than any international order in the history of humanity. So 0 great power wars over the past 80 years. Average GDP per capita, so the average standard of living globally is 5 times higher today what it was in 1945, so the average human is 5 times richer. And in 1945, there were only 12 democratic countries in the world. Today, there are nearly 100. And so the world is safer, richer, and freer today than previous periods of human history. And I think that's in large part because of this system. So after the end of the Cold War, there was a lot of optimism, maybe even some naivete, but we saw countries in Eastern Europe that had been communist rushing to adopt democratic forms of government, free markets, wanting to join NATO and the EU. And I think there was this hope that this system could become universal. And then here we come to China, that even countries like China would join. And so the US strategy was to engage China, bring them into international institutions like the World Trade Organization. And the hope was that as we traded with China more, it would become wealthier. As it became wealthier, it would become more democratic. As it became more democratic, it would become more cooperative on the world stage. Essentially, I think the hope was that it would become kind of like Germany or Japan, a free market democracy in Asia. And the term that was used was a responsible stakeholder, the hope that China would become a responsible stakeholder in the rules-based international system. What we started to realize, though, in the 2010s was that the strategy wasn't working. Instead of becoming more cooperative with international rules, China was continuing to steal intellectual property, engage in unfair trade practices economically. Instead of becoming more democratic, it was becoming more repressive, with Xi setting himself up to be dictator for life, with China engaged in genocide against its Uyghur population at home. And instead of becoming more cooperative on the world stage, China was becoming more aggressive, building a military to invade Taiwan, making daily military threats against Taiwan, taking territory from neighboring countries in the South China Sea, taking islands. And so by 2017, the United States realized that it needed to change its strategy. And the first Trump administration in its national security strategy declared a great power competition with China and Russia the foremost challenge facing the United States. And that's been continued under Biden and now again in Trump 2. So we're still early in the Trump 2 administration, but the Pentagon has released an interim national defense strategy that sees China as the foremost priority and the number one priority for the Department of Defense. So that's kind of the history and how we got here. So I think the United States feels like it tried very hard to cooperate and engage with China, and it didn't work, and so a new approach is needed. So second part of the talk, what are the challenges we see from China? And I think it is a comprehensive set of challenges. It's economic, technological, values, diplomatic, military, and really ultimately about global order itself. So first on the economic side, as I said, China engages in unfair trade practices, stealing intellectual property from the United States and Europe. Also restricts foreign companies from doing business in China. And so what would often happen is an American company would set up a factory in China. They would steal the intellectual property, set up a factory next door doing the same thing at a lower price, run the American company out of business that would then have to go home. So these are practices inconsistent with WTO and other trade laws. Also economically, China attempted to expand its influence. I'd say succeeded in expanding its influence through this Belt and Road Initiative, making infrastructure investments in many countries around the world. Although in many instances, the recipient countries were left disappointed. So often the infrastructure was of poor quality. And I understand that there was a Chinese-built train station here that collapsed and has led to a crisis here. So my condolences to those who lost their life in that tragedy. Also, the Chinese environmental standards are not up to Western standards, so there was often pollution involved with their infrastructure developments. Their human rights practices, not up to Western standards, so often poor treatment of the workers in Chinese infrastructure projects. And then I think also the economic benefits weren't as great as many of the host nations had hoped. Instead of it creating jobs for the local population, often the Chinese would bring in Chinese workers who would do the work. And there was also problems with corruption, that the Chinese would pay local officials to get these infrastructure projects to capture the elites. So those are the kind of economic challenges. There's also a set of technological challenges, and I think we take it for granted because the kind of greater West has had a technological advantage maybe since the first industrial revolution, which has given us economic and other advantages. And so China wants to claim those advantages for itself and has a plan to dominate the leading technologies of the 21st century, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and others, and has a lead in certain applications of artificial intelligence. And so I think the United States sees that as a challenge. If China has sophisticated military technology that would make it easier for it to invade Taiwan, for example, but also a challenge to our values. I think in the West, we've essentially embedded our values into technology. You can see that with the internet, with the values of openness and transparency. But if China dominates 21st century technology, it will embed its autocratic values into the technology. And we're already seeing that happen with China using its advantages in artificial intelligence to develop facial recognition technology to spy on all of its citizens, and then exporting that technology to other dictators. And so if China controls the 21st century technology, what does that mean for global democracy and freedom and human rights? Something I worry about. And so this brings us to the values piece. China, not a free society, has more than 1 million Uyghurs, Uyghur Muslim minority population locked up in concentration camps, and is trying to eradicate that culture from Chinese society. Other human rights violations as well, so harvesting organs from prisoners for medical purposes against their will, not a free society. And then there's these diplomatic challenges, including through these multilateral institutions of the rules-based order, where China uses its influence really to turn these organizations against their intended purpose. And so a good example is the World Health Organization, where China is using its influence in the World Health Organization to prevent an investigation into the origins of COVID-19. And of course, if we don't know how COVID-19 started, harder to figure out how to prevent it from happening again, but China won't let us do that. And then there is the military component. So as I said, China is already taking territory in the South China Sea from Philippines, Vietnam, and others. But most importantly, militarily, Xi says he will take Taiwan. He'd prefer to do it peacefully, but he'll do it militarily if necessary. And he's asked his military to give him the ability to invade Taiwan by the year 2027, so 2 years from now. So that doesn't mean he's going to invade in 2027, but he does want the option to invade by 2027. And so the United States has a policy of strategic ambiguity toward Taiwan, meaning maybe we would defend Taiwan, maybe we wouldn't. But President Biden said 4 times that if China invaded Taiwan, the United States would defend Taiwan. So that could lead to a direct war between the United States and China, the 2 largest powers on Earth, 2 nuclear powers. So that could lead to a devastating conflict, one that could become global for reasons we could discuss. And then ultimately, I think the threat is about global order. So President Xi has said that by 2049, the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party takeover of China, that China will be the leading state in the international system. So I think what Xi wants to do is create an alternative global order centered on China, consistent with China's autocratic values, in a way that may be beneficial to China, but I think in a way that would be detrimental to the free world and Western democracies. So this is a big challenge, and again, arguably a bigger challenge than the United States has ever faced. I guess I should just point out, if it's not already clear, I think that this is a challenge to Europe as well. Obviously, if there's a major war between the United States and China, there will be implications for Europe. It would likely lead to a global depression. There's a war among the world's 2 largest powers. If China dominates 21st century technology, I think that would have a direct implication for the prosperity and freedom of European countries if they're dependent on a dictatorship for their technology. And also economically, we have seen that China uses its economic leverage for coercion. So, for example, South Korea is a country that does a lot of trade with China. And several years ago, when South Korea was thinking about deploying a U.S. missile defense system, China used coercion, shut down South Korean department stores operating in China, and then cut off Chinese tourists from visiting South Korea, which is a major source of revenue for South Korea. And so I think any country that becomes too dependent on China economically becomes vulnerable to that type of coercion. So Europe has a stake. Okay, so what is the emerging strategy for dealing with this? So this is kind of the third part of the talk. And some people are referring to this as a new Cold War. And so if we use that analogy, we're in 1949 or 1950, we're only a few years in. So I think the United States and its allies are still developing the strategy. But first, a good strategy starts with a clear goal. And I don't think the US goal is overthrowing the Chinese Communist Party. I think it is really more defensive and trying to defend our interest against these challenges posed by China. So first on the economic piece, to deal with the unfair trade practices, I think part of what the United States and Europe are doing together is this de-risking approach. Maybe a term you've heard, de-risking. It's a term the European Union uses. And so the point is, not that we shouldn't do business with China. In certain areas, say if we want to sell agriculture to China, that's fine. If we want to buy Chinese t-shirts, that's fine. But when it comes to more sensitive areas, military, technology, critical infrastructure, that there we do want to be very careful because of the risks that trade with China poses, and that it would be better to have secure supply chains with trusted Western partners. And so I think we saw first a push with 5G in Europe to persuade European allies not to put in place Huawei 5G technology. But this is expanding now into other areas, including semiconductors, electric vehicles, and elsewhere. And then there's the technology part of the competition. I think the goal here that Biden and Trump agreed on is for the United States and the West to maintain their technological leadership. So I think part of that is running faster. How can we maintain our own innovation ecosystems? And so we've seen major steps here, like the CHIPS Act, investing in the production of advanced semiconductors in the United States. But part of the strategy also is pulling China back. Because remember, our strategy for the past 30 years or so was helping China to develop, because we thought that would be good for us. And so we knew they were stealing our technology. We knew they weren't playing by the rules. But we were okay with that because that was part of the strategy. Now that the strategy's changed, we're no longer okay with that. And so the United States has strengthened its investment screening laws. So when China tries to buy a company or buy real estate in the United States, it's screened by a committee that decides, is this a national security threat or not? And in a number of cases, the Chinese investments are blocked. And the United States has also been working with allies to put in place similar mechanisms. So Sweden, Israel, other allies have put in their own investment screening mechanisms in recent years. And I was just in Stockholm, and they were talking about some of the Chinese investments they've blocked for security reasons. There are also export controls. So when American companies want to sell a technology to China, they have to get an export license to do that. And the Department of Commerce decides, would it be a security threat or not to export this technology? So it blocks some of those technology exports. And again, the United States is working with allies to also put in place similar mechanisms. Because even if the United States has the perfect strategy, it doesn't work if China can just go to Europe and get the technology, or go to Japan and get the technology. So really here, a kind of whole of free world approach would work best. And then diplomatically, the United States has been working to build a coalition of countries that can work together on some of these malign Chinese practices. So the European Union has declared China as a systemic rival. It has a three-part framework: partner, competitor, a systemic rival. So it recognizes that systemic rivalry piece. The United States has established this Quad framework in Asia. So it's Japan, India, the United States, and Australia working more closely together. It's not defined this way, but is essentially an anti-China bloc. There's also the AUKUS agreement, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia working to get Australia submarines to counter China. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo argued that the country that did the most to build an anti-China coalition was China. And China's bad behavior made it easy for him to get other countries on board to do this. And then the military piece is an important piece because we don't want to fight a war with China, we want to deter it. And so, as I said, the Pentagon has declared this the foremost priority. The Trump administration has just announced the largest U.S. defense budget in history, more than $1 trillion a year, that will be focused on deterring China in the Taiwan Strait. And other European allies have also been helping with this. So the past several NATO communiques have had statements about how NATO desires peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And so it's just a statement, but I think it's helpful because it communicates to China that this isn't just a conflict between you and Taiwan. This isn't just a conflict between you and the United States. All of NATO, all of the free world doesn't want to see World War III start over Taiwan. And then European allies have also been engaging in some shows of military force in the Indo-Pacific. So the British, the French, the Dutch, some other countries have sent warships through the Taiwan Strait, through the South China Sea, in freedom of navigation operations. Essentially to say these are international waters and we have the ability to sail here if we want. And some European allies have also sent staff officers to participate in military exercises in the region. And again, I think the purpose is the same. It's not that a French ship is going to stop China from invading Taiwan, but it sends the message that France does have interest in the Indo-Pacific. They don't want to see China invade Taiwan. So I think this is a dangerous moment. There is a risk that Xi could decide to attack Taiwan. Implications for Europe there: if the United States is tied down in a big war in Asia, what does that mean for European security? Does Russia think this is an opportunity to attack a NATO ally while the United States is distracted? And we do know that Xi and Putin are working very, very closely together. They've declared a no-limits partnership. China is supporting Russia's war effort in Ukraine. Russia wouldn't be able to sustain the war in Ukraine if it weren't for the massive support it's getting from China. So I think it's a dangerous moment, but ultimately I'm an optimist. And if you just look at the kind of balance of power, I think some people have this misperception that China is rising and huge and unstoppable. But actually, the United States has about 26% of global GDP. And contrary to the idea that the United States is a declining power, that its share is actually rising. This is the largest share of global GDP the United States has had in 20 years. China is about 18% of global GDP. But you add in formal U.S. treaty allies, NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, etc., the United States and its free world allies have more than half of global GDP. So working together, we do have the preponderance of power to deal with these threats posed by China. And if it is a new Cold War, I'm hopeful that just like in the first Cold War, the free world can prevail. And what would success look like as, I guess, a final point, and avoiding the Thucydides trap? I hope what China's leaders will conclude is that challenging the United States, challenging its allies, hasn't worked for China. We were actually better off in the 1990s and the 2000s, cooperating with the West, cooperating with the United States. So this confrontational approach under President Xi is not working, and we need to go back to a more cooperative approach. And if we could get there, I think that would be success. So maybe I'll stop my remarks there and look forward to questions and discussion.
Now we can start with the Q&A section. Please. We don't have yeah.
Stefan Gajic into European Studies. Much of what you have just described, and unfortunately I'm sorry for being late, so I couldn't come to the first part. But much of it was described by your colleague, graduate from Georgetown University, Mike Vance, in his latest interview with Tucker Carlson. But he was saying that this was exactly what the United States was doing. Another thing is that when you use the term free world, it means different things in different geographical spots. So for instance here, I would say the majority of people see some other parts of the world as free world. A symbol of free world would be, let's say, Ibrahim Traoré, who decolonized his country from the French. And my question is, we are already, we can start from the point that we are already living a multipolar reality. It is not a multipolar order, because what we see is a disorder, which usually is a period of history in between two world orders. Whether we talk about what was before the Westphalian peace, or the Versailles order, the World War I, or the Yalta order, there was World War II, and now obviously since the beginning of revision of history, I would say, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, we are in a time of crisis that accelerates, especially since 2022. So, in this moment, what do you think is possible for the United States to try to regain some of its soft power? For instance, in my view, I think Donald Trump is doing actually a good job in that, when he said that he will end with the liberal interventionism, that the United States is not there to spread the LGBT agenda around the world, but to preserve its vital national interests wherever it sees important. So that's my question. What is with the soft power? Joseph Nye just died recently, the man who coined the term. And what do you think the United States can do in this respect, in this region particularly, because during the 90s, actually, we were in war with the United States, both in Croatia, Bosnia, and in Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. So what do you think can be done here and globally in that respect? Thank you very much.
Yeah, good. And should I go ahead and respond?
Yes.
Okay. So, well, thanks for that. Good question, and also I'm here to learn from you as well. So love it that you also provided some of your perspective. And Joseph and I was on the board of the Atlantic Council, so was had a terrific career, of course, but sad to see him go. So I do think soft power is an important tool the United States has, and the University of Southern California conducts a survey of soft power, the Soft Power 30, where they basically just do public opinion polls around the world and ask people what are the countries you like the most. The top 20 countries in the poll are all democracies. The United States is number 5, I think, so not number 1. China and Russia make the list, but near the bottom. I think China's 27 and Russia is 30. So I do think soft power is still an advantage the United States has. And I think part of the solution is just doing a better job of telling the story. Part of the reason I'm here to try to tell the story as I see it. But Trump's recent speech against liberal interventionism, I think there's a consensus in the United States now that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan didn't really work as hoped. And I think there is an agreement that invading a country, overthrowing the government, staying for 30 years without a clear strategy, is not something that anybody wants to do anytime soon. And I think there's agreement on that. But I would argue in terms of securing vital interests that the United States does have a vital interest in a free and open international trading system. It doesn't need to push its values down other countries' throats, including LGBTQ values in countries that have more traditional values. But that the United States does have an interest in encouraging freedom and democracy and good governance where it can do that. And so I guess I think that the U.S. approach over the past 80 years has been a kind of enlightened self-interest, that we have had an interest in promoting, again, free markets, free politics, and so on. On your point on the multipolar world, I guess I see the world forming into 3 blocks, and I'd welcome your comment on this. So one, I think we see what I'd call the free world as more unified than, and backing up, I think the war in Ukraine was an important clarifying moment for this. So I think after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, we have seen, I think, the free world more united than in the past. Finland and Sweden wanting to join NATO, Korea providing munitions to Ukraine, Japan and Korea joining in on the sanctions against Russia. So I think the liberal democracies in North America, Europe, and the Indo-Pacific working together very closely. Second, I think we've seen a kind of new axis of autocracies, of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea working more closely together, with China, again, sustaining Russia's war effort, North Korea with troops on the ground fighting with Russia, Iran providing drones for Russia's war against Ukraine. And then third, kind of a new non-aligned movement. Swing states that don't really want to take sides. And I think we often think about this in Washington as the global South: India, Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa. And if you'd asked me the day before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, would India join us in condemning that? I think I would have said yes. I'm guessing the Biden administration would have said yes. I think many people were surprised when instead India said that's not our problem. And this is an opportunity to buy cheap oil and gas. So I don't know, maybe Serbia is also in the swing state category, not really wanting to choose sides. But so I don't know if it's really a multipolar order, because I think there's still huge power disparities. The Free World Coalition is almost 60% of global GDP. So I think still the hegemonic force, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, only 18% of global GDP. Significant, but less powerful, and then the rest of the world with the remaining. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, please.
The question would be regarding the U.S. perception of Europe. What do you think the U.S. policy would prefer to see in Europe? Maybe a strongly militarized Europe, which could possibly play an allied role in a possible conflict with China, or perhaps Europe as it is right now, not quite a strong military industry and other simply would not quite be the possibility to project military power as the US is able to. Of course, in the light of possible conflict with China.
Yes. Good question, and I think the United States would like to see a stronger Europe. And you've had presidential administrations going all the way back to Eisenhower in the 1950s, complaining about Europe not spending enough on defense. President Obama complained about this. Trump is just louder, I think, in his complaints. And I think part of the reason is because of China. If the United States needs to focus more on China and the Indo-Pacific, recognizes that it can't do everything, that it does need a stronger Europe to deter Russia, as the United States focuses more on China. And so currently, the NATO allies, as you probably know, have all pledged to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense. But President Trump has called for NATO allies to spend 5% of GDP on defense. And from my conversations with NATO leaders in recent weeks, including with Secretary General Rutte just last week, it does look like at the Hague summit in the coming weeks that there will be a new 5% defense spending pledge. And so that would be 3.5% kind of hard defense spending, and then 1.5% on other security-related spending, cybersecurity, things like that. And so it does seem like we are making progress of making Europe stronger to help the United States maintain peace and stability in both Europe and Asia.
Do you think those spendings would be diverted towards buying US equipment or strengthening their own military industrial capacities?
Yes. I think it should be both, because I think we do have kind of a crisis in our defense industrial base right now. We don't have the ability to produce the weapons we need. We see that playing out on the war in Ukraine, and we can't produce enough or at the start anyway, couldn't produce enough 155 millimeter shells. I was in Taiwan not too long ago, and they were complaining about their back orders. They've been paying for weapons from the United States, but we can't deliver on time. And so we do need a more robust defense industry. But realistically, some of the capabilities that Europe is going to need soon are only available in the United States right now. So I don't think we can afford to wait 7 years or longer to fix the European defense industrial base to get some of these capabilities. So I think the answer is some of both. But if we could have a more capable European defense industry, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, can I have 2 questions. As I told you previously, I'm dealing with Latin American countries, Portugal and Spain. And the first question is, I know that the focus of this presentation is on Europe and Chinese presence in Europe, but how do you see Chinese presence in Latin American countries? Not only economically, where they are dominant trade partners in south from the line of Colombia and Venezuela. How do you see their military cooperation with some countries, not only Venezuela or Nicaragua, but also with Bahamas, for example? I read that they have already signed some military agreement and they have some sort of exchange of military technology, and we know how Bahamas are important for the preservation of the American strategic interests in that part of the world. And the second question is, I think that only a few days after the new US President Donald Trump has announced that the US will impose tariffs on EU products, that Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has visited China and also made an agreement with Xi Jinping about economic cooperation between Spain and China, also trying to open the door for the Chinese investments on European soil. I think that his idea was to show to Trump that the EU has alternatives if he's not willing to get rid of that tariff policy. So, can you give us?
Yes, good question. So first on China and Latin America, I recently authored a report on this through the Atlantic Council that I could send to you. But yes, some of the same challenges in Europe we do see in Latin America. So China is the #1 trading partner for most countries in Latin America now. 20 years ago, it was the United States. And so I think part of the message should be the message I was delivering here. It's not saying no interaction with China. Agriculture, for example, Brazil exports a lot of soybeans to China.
Argentina beef.
Argentina beef, and so that's fine. What I would argue they should be worried about is other more sensitive areas. So Chinese control of ports in Panama or Peru, the Chinese setting up a space satellite listening ground station in Argentina, Chinese spy base in Cuba. So kind of that de-risking message as well. Also, technology, as they install 5G and 6G, the dangers of having Chinese infrastructure. So I think that's part of the message, the de-risking message. Go ahead and export soybeans. We're not asking you to choose between the United States and China, but in some of these sensitive areas, it's not in our interest, and I would argue not in their interest, to become vulnerable to China in those important areas. On the trade war, I guess I'd make a few points. One, past presidents, including Ronald Reagan, used tariffs against the European Common Market because we've never had fully free and fair trade between the United States and Europe. Both sides have subsidies and tariffs and non-tariff barriers. And so Reagan in the 1980s used tariffs against the European Common Market to force a trade negotiation. And so I think Trump is trying to do something similar. Recent reporting suggests that there is a path to a US-EU trade deal, which I think would be terrific. I'm not president of the United States. If I were, I would have held off on the trade war with Europe to focus on China, which I think is the big challenge, and say, well, we'll hold off on our trade dispute, help us with the China challenge, including with de-risking. So maybe we'll get there. That's my hope, that we'll resolve this. In terms of the threats that, well, if the United States is going to tariff us, we'll just turn to China. I've heard that as well. But from my discussion with European leaders, I think that if there's an interest in substituting for trade with the United States, it's less with China and more with countries like Canada, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Japan, India, where they see possible new trade arrangements, less than China.
Thank you. Next question.
My name is Његово. I'm a researcher there at the Institute of European Studies. I noticed you mentioned China acting punitively towards South Korea, for example, in essentially trying to enforce its own vision of what is permissible and what is not in terms of geopolitical and military behavior. My question is, in a possible scenario where the United States would be led by someone like Trump, who is highly motivated by a particular conception of national interest, somewhat isolationist, how likely would you say that a similar punitive measure in terms of trade could be effectively implemented by the Chinese in a response to, say, the US taking a more aggressive stand towards the defense of Taiwan, which it still does not recognize? I mean, I still think it's a very indicative factor that the US has still held off on recognizing Taiwan, given its the importance of its trade relationship with China.
And just to make sure I understood, so you're saying there's
how likely are they to suspend trade connections in response to the US wanting to defend Taiwan more strongly?
Yes, so could China cut off trade with the United States?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, first on the part about recognizing Taiwan, it's a weird and complicated situation. The one China policy and the 7 communiques, and there are 7 reassurances, the 3 communiques. But we are where we are, and I think U.S. policy has been consistent that let's just keep the status quo. So we don't want to see Taiwan declare independence, in part because that could be one of the things that would trigger China to attack but we also don't want to see China to attack. So let's try to maintain the status quo is essentially the U.S. position. And then could China retaliate against the United States? You know, China is doing its own de-risking. They call it a dual circulation strategy, where they explicitly say that their goal is to be autonomous and not dependent on other countries, but to make other countries as economically dependent on China as possible. And so could they retaliate against the United States? Well, you know, in this recent trade war, you know, when the Trump administration first put in place tariffs, we did see China retaliate with tariffs of its own, which then led Trump to retaliate and then climb down. So I think there are things they can do like that. But it's a good question. I've spent more time thinking about, in the event of a crisis, what are the economic tools that we would have? And so there have been discussions between the United States and Europe about the possible sanctions we might want to put in place in the event of a conflict against China. You know, because in the war in Ukraine, I think a lot of people kind of had their head in the sand, even as Russia was mounting forces on the border. Many people were saying, well, a war's not going to happen. And then when it did, we found ourselves kind of de-risking from Russia overnight, putting in sanctions overnight. And so to prevent that from happening, there has been more forethought into, if there is a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, what are the economic measures we'd want to have ready to go. And then worst case scenario, of course, if it's a major war blockade, you know, U.S.-China trade could drop to almost nothing. Europe-China trade could drop to almost nothing, you know, if ships can't get in and out because of a conflict. And so I don't have all the answers, but I think these are scenarios we should start thinking through more now before it happens.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Adam Supranijević. I come from University Library Belgrade. And for my question, which is two in one, I will go back to retired General Michael Hayden's lecture series a few years back when he described 5 forces converging to bring down the post-Second World War order. And the first 3 of those forces were China, but on number 1 place he put US, and on second place he put digital world. So I'm kind of trying to make you talk a bit more about these hybrid things. You gave a beautiful lectures on 1.0, but I would like you to just comment, if possible, why is it so? Do you think these hybrid things are negligible, or for sake of clarity, you just talk about traditional country-to-country relations? Because if you look at the US, we have divergent voices, and also if you look at the digital world, you know, digital world is making everyone around the world having an attention span of 30 seconds. So how do we sustain democracy if everything is a one-liner? And if you translate this to politics, you have one-liner politics. So, and how does China play into this? Because I think they are aware of these facts. So these 2 questions in one: US and digital world, China.
Good, thanks. And I don't think I've seen Michael Hayden's speech, so I'll have to go back and watch that. It sounds really interesting. But if his point about the United States is, you know, will the United States continue to play the role that it's played since 1945? And that's a question others are asking too. And there are real questions about that, with President Trump calling into question the value of some of these longstanding institutions and practices. Maybe this has come through. I am an optimist by nature, and so I think we will. And just one data point: in Trump's first term, you know, there was a lot of rhetoric, but I would argue that the underlying policy in the end was actually pretty good. You know, the decision to get tough with China in the first place was President Trump's, and I'm not sure that if Marco Rubio or Hillary Clinton had gotten elected, they would have done the same thing. So I think the disruptive approach is sometimes helpful. And then even in Europe, where Trump had a lot of tough rhetoric for allies, ultimately I would argue that the NATO alliance was strengthened in the Trump years. NATO allies spent more on defense. North Macedonia and Montenegro joined the alliance during the Trump administration. So I think Trump has a lot of rhetoric that questions conventional wisdom, but I'm hopeful that, like in the first term, the underlying policy will lead to good results. And then on the digital world, and again, I haven't seen the lecture, but I do think this is an important force. Some have referred to this as the fourth industrial revolution. The free world has essentially was responsible for the first, second, and third industrial revolutions. And so, who wins this kind of new tech arms race? Is it Western democracies, or is it China, which is autocratic power? So I think the stakes really couldn't be higher. In terms of how do you sustain democracy with a 30-second attention span, I don't know. My wife's a few years younger than me, and I feel like sometimes she's more married to the phone than me. So I don't have a good answer there. And if you have it, let me know. It'll be good for my marriage too.
I'll be glad to win.
We have time for one more question, so please.
Oh, thank you.
The floor is yours.
My name is Rado Lovecic, and currently I'm the president of the Fulbright Alumni Association of Serbia, Fulbright and France, Alumni Association of all scholars from Serbia that were educated in the United States. First of all, I would like to thank you for your very interesting, remarkable presentation and very good responses to all the questions. I have one question. You have mentioned in your presentation an axis of autocracy between Beijing and Moscow. What is your opinion? What is the strength of this axis now? And what will be the strength? Do you see any cracks at the moment in this axis? And do you expect those cracks will emerge, be higher or not? Thank you.
Yes, maybe the last question about Chinese investment here in Serbia. What is your view on Serbia, on Chinese influence here in Serbia? How will you deal with that? Maybe with more Western investments from European Union, from America here in Serbia. Sorry.
Good. Yeah. Happy to take both. Then, where did you study in the United States?
Texas A&M.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And in the beginning of the 90s, I'm an economist. I was professor of economics and environmental economics here in Belgrade and in Budapest, also Central Europe.
Good. So on the China-Russia alliance, I think they are being brought together by this shared worldview that the post-World War II or post-Cold War order hasn't been in their interest, and so they're going to work together to tear it down. And there was this moment caught on camera that maybe you saw, where I think it was Xi who turned to Putin and said, "We're driving changes in the international system that haven't been seen for 100 years. You and I are driving these changes." And Putin said, "Yes, I agree." So I think they are explicit in this goal of trying to revise the existing international order. But I think there are limits to the partnership, despite the fact they call it no limits. I think there are limits. I don't think it'll ever be as deep and trusting as, say, the US-UK relationship or NATO. And just look at the last time Russia and China signed an alliance. They ended up going to war against each other, and that almost went nuclear in the 1960s. So I wouldn't be surprised if they turned on each other at some point, but for now, I'm worried. And even if it's not a deep and trusting alliance, they can cause a lot of trouble, and so I'm still worried. On Chinese investment in Serbia, I guess it's a question for you, but I guess some thoughts I would have is, if there is a future for Serbia in the EU, follow the trends in other European countries, and it does seem like the trend is toward de-risking and carefully screening Chinese investments. So I'd say, just be cautious and how are the current investments doing? Have they paid off in the way that you would hope that they would, or are some of these downsides that other countries experienced, environmental problems, human rights problems, have the economic incentives been as great as you would hope? So keep an eye on that. And then on purchasing Chinese military equipment, is there a future for Serbia working more closely with other European countries in terms of security and defense? And if so, then probably buying Western military equipment would make that kind of interoperability easier than buying Chinese military equipment. So I get you're a sovereign country, make your own decisions, but I guess I look carefully as to whether the benefits of engagement with China are all that they've promised.
Thank you very much, Professor Krenić. We are very, very happy to have you here in Belgrade with us at the Institute of European Studies. Thank you to come in our institute. I want to give you notes of thanks because on Cyrillic, it's Serbian because you were here, and maybe it will be remembering you of your visit here. Thank you, and thank you to you also for your question and for these discussions. Okay.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you very much.